Well, very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time. And I can see pretty much a full house here, which actually makes me feel that compliance is really important, right? It gives the assurance that what we are doing today is the right thing to do. So we are here to discuss the topic. There's a bit of an echo. I hope that's all right. Okay, brilliant. So we are going to be talking about this topic, which is very, very interesting, which is called new market and the regulatory developments that impact compliance programs. So very interestingly, I was talking to some of the guys who are in this room here. Yesterday we had a workshop that was led by Michael Rasmussen there. And one thing that was across the board, one thing that was very, very common to all the participants I spoke to was the fact that it's very, very hard in today's world to understand the regulatory landscape, to kind of understand what the new regulations are coming in, how to interpret it in the right way, and making sure that not only the second line of defense understands what it is, also the first line of defense understands the importance of the new regulation and how they can make this a part of their DNA, the day-to-day job, rather than considering it as a measure of control. So I completely empathize with the compliance officers that we have in the room. It's increasingly getting difficult with new technologies, new changing world coming into the picture. And I completely understand that it is very, very difficult for you to manage regulations, manage regulatory expectations, and also making sure that the changes that you are going to make internally is being put into effect the right way. So in order for us to discuss the topic that we have in hand here, I have three extremely capable speakers with me who brings in decades of experience in managing regulatory change and also in the world of managing compliance, large compliance programs. So let me just quickly introduce them. So I have Kubra Mirza with me, who's the group head of compliance at Bank AlKhair. She's a professional with over 20 years of experience in investment banking, financial regulations, legal corporate governance, compliance, financial crimes, anti-money laundering, etc. She is currently working as the Chief Compliance Officer, MLRO, and Compliance Secretary at Bank AlKhair BSC, a Bahrain-based Islamic wholesale investment bank. Previous experience as she was the head of policies and central risk unit at the Central Bank of Bahrain, was also a member of several management committees of the CBB, including Basel II Committee, the Financial Institution Law Committee, the Regulatory Policies Committee, Banking Supervision Committee, and the E-Government Committee. She was also a member of several local and international regulatory working groups and task forces representing the CBB, including Basel II Pillar 1 and 2 Working Group. We have the Islamic Financial Service Board and the Market Conduct Working Group and Arab Monetary Funds Banking Supervision Working Group. So welcome, Kubra. Thank you very much for coming. If you can just please grab a seat here. Up next, I have Vona Ezichi. She's the Compliance Director of Jones Lang LaSalle. Vona is the Head of Risk Management and Compliance Oversight for Property and Asset Management at JLL. She's a chartered accountant and a GRC professional at heart. She's the chair of the PAM Risk and Compliance Board and sits in a number of other governance boards across the domain. Vona started her professional career in the financial services audit with KPMG and BNP Paribas. She has passion for strong values, ethical thinking, and conduct risk awareness and compliance. She's also passionate about inspiring and impossibility thinking, the glass ceiling shattering type, and inspiring women to flourish in the corporate world. Interestingly, she's also the co-founder of Inspiring Role Models and DV's, a luxury food and drink company pioneering the West African flavors through exquisite products. So we have a compliance officer and an entrepreneur amongst us. So Vona, if you can just join us on the panel, please. Up next, we have Yurika Pistorius. She is the Group Compliance Officer for Clientele. Yurika graduated at the University of Pretoria in South Africa with a degree in law. So she had BLC and LLB and a certificate in compliance management from the University of Cape Town. She is an admitted attorney at the High Court of South Africa. She is also a member of the Compliance Institute of South Africa, and she has been awarded the professional designation of compliance practitioner. She is also registered as a compliance officer in the Financial Sector and Conduct Authority. She is currently the Group Compliance Officer and appointed as a Compliance Executive for the Clientele Limited Group, which is a diversified financial services group listed in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So can I have a huge round of applause for all the three panelists here as we go into the workshop? Excellent. So the way we would do it is we've got roughly 40 minutes remaining for the entire session. So we'll try and wrap up. We've got about 5 questions that we want to talk about, which we feel are important for today's discussion here. And then we'll try to keep the last 10 minutes for any Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to take them down. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us at the end of the session. Yeah. All right. So let me probably start with Yurika then. I think one thing, and this is something which came up in our workshop yesterday, at an average, we are seeing organizations receiving about 86 odd feeds from new compliance regulation that come in every single day. So as an organization, as a chief compliance officer, how do you manage this? I mean, how do you manage this humongous number of feeds that come in, and how do you prioritize internally and make sure that your teams are adhering to the new regulations that are coming in the market? So probably we'll start with you, Yurika, if that's okay.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me? It's quite clear. So first of all, welcome after the graveyard shift. I'm quite surprised to see everybody here. I actually thought it was going to be empty house. I came from, I'm going to give a bit of a story if you don't mind before I answer this. I came from South Africa on, what's the day, Monday, on Sunday, or no, on Saturday, and yesterday evening I went to Remembrance Sunday. Who went there? Can I get a show of hands? So were all of you standing in that queue for such a long time? I mean, I was there around 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock I was still queuing. And it reminded me of compliance. So it really reminded me of compliance. Always in the queue, and you have to tick the box. Just have to stand in line, move to the left, move to the right. And all of a sudden, here comes a security guard, and she just lifts up a barrier. She just moves it 1 meter to the left. And all of a sudden, the line started moving. And I thought to myself, such a normal move, just to move a barrier. And all of a sudden, the flow started moving. And that for me is, I think our compliance world these days is we need to think out of the box. Not that that's really out of the box, but she literally saw opportunity. She saw, let me move the barrier and hopefully the flow will improve. And I promise you within half an hour, we were at the Tower Bridge. So how do I look at compliance, or we as a company? We look exactly the same. So we get, in South Africa, we get about 680 regulations that affect South African insurance companies. That's our regulatory risk universe. There's no way that you can deal with all of that. So you do a high risk or a risk-based priority. And you do, at this stage, very manual feeding. I don't know who still operates on Excel. Quite sure you do. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a CA, so I'm not very good at Excel. I can just read and write, I cannot really do the Excel stuff. But systems, AI is becoming extremely important. If you have a proper system, if you can look at your regulatory landscape, you can sit with management. I think that's very important. How to deal with new legislation is coming closer to the business. We used to work in such isolation. We used to sit in corners, and you have to have business there. I think the opportunity that we have these days is to work together with the business and to start mapping those regulatory risks and look at high risks.
Yeah.
So that's our way of monitoring. Lobbying, I've heard that Kubra sits on a lot of the governance committees. Very important that you lobby with the committees, that you sit on those regulators' functions, and that you operate within an industry like this. Extremely important, because the knowledge share has become so important in this diverse world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Yurika. So, Kubra, according to you, what are some of the best practices to stay ahead in the regulatory change curve?
I think there is no one size fits all.
Yeah.
For me, in my institution, we do it manually, as Yurika said. But we're maybe lucky in Bahrain. We don't, regulatory changes doesn't happen like in one time. Normally, we have a process for regulation. I was a regulator before, and I was writing the regulation. So before we write regulation, in the central bank, in Bahrain, it takes long time for the central bank to come up with a regulation which meets the requirement, and also it's relevant for the culture and for the market needs. So once they come up after a long time with a piece of regulation, they publish it or send it to all banks or financial institutions and experts in the financial sector for consultation. So they give time for the market and the companies to read, understand, do gap analysis, do impact assessments, and then they send feedback to the regulator. regulator reads the feedback and they do meetings with some banks or banks association, and then they finalize the regulation. Sometimes they do another set of consultation if they see there is resistance in the industry to explain some matters. So what I'm saying here, regulations doesn't come to the financial sector in Bahrain like as a shock, but once it's implemented, it's already known. And internally, as compliance officer, what we do, I mean, in my institution, when I receive any change or a new regulation or regulatory change, immediately I distribute that regulation to all head of departments and the relevant staff, senior management, and I try to explain the regulation on a high level before it's implemented. And I ask for feedback and all the relevant people to review in detail and do some assessments how this regulation is going to impact their departments. And then I receive feedback. Sometimes if the regulation is really too much affecting the institution, then we have a meeting. Sometimes we go for Bankers Association to defend ourselves and say this is not good for the market. So at the end, we go with our feedback to the regulator. When they finalize it, in the final stage, we send it to the board and to the audit committee. We make sure the board is aware of the regulation, the coming regulation. If there is a need for systems and control, we make budget. We ask for the budget, and if it's just a normal regulation, we just try to live with it. So this is the process we do. We deal with the regulatory changes in my institution.
Excellent. That's very well explained. Thank you very much, Kubra.
Thank you.
Vona, are you on a similar path there, or is there any best practice that you would share which comes from your part of the work?
Best practice that I would share is that at the moment, so it's quite manual, like Yurika said, but at the moment we're looking at platforms. There are platforms out there that automatically update you on industry-specific regulation. So we're looking at that. Personally as well, for my team, I'm subscribed to a number of compliance technology organizations. So like MetricStream, Compliance Next, Compliance Week, and they send lots of resources, articles about about regulation, and those help me prioritize as a compliance director. So for me, that's my best practice.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. So the next thing that I'm very, very curious to know from all the compliance officers here is how are you assessing the impact of these regulatory changes that come in day out, and the impact that it has on your organizational policies, your risks, your controls, your processes, etc. And how do you manage these changes? Kubra, we'll start with you this time.
In each institution, there are a set of policies and procedures, and we make sure that somebody in the institution owns those policies and procedures. So it's always there is an owner. Maybe at the time of developing those procedures, compliance gets involved and helps the departments to produce those policies and procedures. But at the end, there is somebody who owns those policies and procedure. So whenever there is new regulation, we, from our assessment, like compliance officer, we put the, we do the impact assessment, and we say, for example, like finance or audit, or like board of director, corporate secretary is responsible of making sure the policies, and we list the policies which we believe will be affected, and we ask the department themselves to make sure those policies are up to date and reflects the new regulation. From the compliance perspective, also at the department, we do have a checklist, a compliance checklist, a comprehensive compliance checklist, which lists all the regulations. From our side also, we do update the compliance checklist. So whenever we do compliance check on regular time, we are up to date. I mean, our checklist is up to date also. Sometimes, I mean, for Bank AlKhair, we're a multinational bank. We have presence in Malaysia, we have presence in Turkey, we have presence in Dubai, we have presence in Saudi, and of course in Bahrain. So we are subject to different regulations in different jurisdictions. I'm the group compliance officer. What I do, I make sure my checklist also covers the regulation of the group, because as per Basel committee, we are responsible of group compliance to oversee group compliance risk. So what we do, we appoint compliance in each jurisdiction, which is responsible to manage compliance risk at the group at the local office there. However, from our side, we make sure that we monitor them and oversee them and make sure that they are also in compliance with their rules and regulations. The best practice says that any group or any multinational institution should apply the stricter of home or host regulator. So what we do whenever there is change also, we check the checklist, we compare the new regulation in other jurisdictions with Bahrain's regulation and see which regulation is stricter, and then we decide which regulation to be applied, whether it's home or host regulation. Okay. So this is the way we do it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Vona, what about you? I mean, how do you manage all these changes and the impact that it has with different components within the organization?
We work through governance boards. So we have a process governance board. It's called CIG, Continuous Improvement Group. And so if there are any changes in regulation or in processes, that board is responsible for reviewing those changes, and they determine if those changes will have any impact on our policies, our procedures, and our processes. And they're also responsible for ensuring that any required changes are made and then communicated to the business. We also have a risk and compliance board. So if there's any risk impact as a result of the change, that board will notify the risk and compliance board. That risk and compliance board would then do their own assessment as to, does this change the risk profile? Are the controls that we have in place sufficient to mitigate the risk? If not, can we implement more controls? And if we can, great. If we can't, if it's a risk, if it's changed risk profile to the extent that we're not able to mitigate the risk, then the risk and compliance board will then escalate to the execs, and then the execs then have to make a decision as to whether or not it's a risk that they want to accept. Obviously, if it's a regulatory change, then it's a risk we have to accept, and we'll probably need to get new controls. If it's a market change, then we can decide, actually, we don't want this risk, and we can change our business accordingly. So we do it mainly through the process governance groups. And what we have is that we have it's the business that sits on those boards. Right. I sit on both boards from a compliance perspective, but we make sure that it's owned by the business. So they're the ones who are making the assessment. So
essentially what you're saying is you're engaging the first line here.
Exactly, yeah.
And making sure that they are feeling part of the entire journey from your side, which is fantastic. And I know for a fact that this is something which a lot of companies are thriving to do, and this is a direction that a lot of companies want to head to, but it's easier said than done. So I'm glad that they're doing it. Yurika, anything that you would want to add on this subject here?
Yes, so from a compliance point of view, I think what's important is that compliance is everyone's business. It's not just the compliance officer's business. So when we look at compliance, or typically I look at it from two sides. I look at it from a governance point of view, and then I look at it from a market conduct point of view. So the main challenge for me was the culture, to change the culture of First Line. First Line had to buy into that compliance is real, it's part of the business, and it's actually your business. If you do it right, your business can succeed. So a lot of things that my colleagues here mentioned in terms of getting the right governance structures, we should be careful not to have so many committees that it stifles the business. And that's what's starting to happen. We have all these committees. So it's good to have an operational group and to have a governance committee, but also for us to sit on all of that and to teach and to learn. I think the most important thing for us as compliance officers as a second line is to strengthen the first line. I think that, I said to somebody the other day, we're actually now a 1.5 line of defense. We've moved with the one leg on the other side, but with the other leg as well on the other side. Because we need to assist, but we also need to be independent. So governing committees definitely help, but it's for us to get involved. Pull up your sleeves and you actually start assisting the business, but you have to empower them. So I think that's for me the most important thing. And then we have you also have TCF outcomes, which typically talks about the first one is the culture. Have to get the culture right. Compliance is this much of the business, where integrity is this much of the business. If you get that holistically right, you're not going to have a problem with any of this. Then our assistance in terms of products, how do we assist the business with that? Ultimately business decisions, but we need to influence them so that they're compliant. And then ultimately, how do we deal with it from a conduct point of view if there are any errors? But I mean, it looks like from all the across the world, like we have the same approach.
Yep.
And that's for me good to hear as well as a speaker, is that we're on the same page.
Absolutely. I really like the fact that you pointed out that you are in a 1.5 line of defense. I would love to see a diagram someday which has, instead of first, second, and 3 lines of defense, 1.5
And a 1.5 line.
which is actually quite relevant in today's world. So yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic that you guys acknowledge that. The next thing I'm curious to understand from you is, how do you see the compliance function integrated with some of the other areas? I mean, I talked about the 3 lines of defense model just now. How do you see this second line function being integrated with a risk, audit, or IT for that matter? And how critical you think that is for the success of your company's whole GRC framework? Right. Let's see. I'll start with Vona.
Right. Okay. I think it's imperative that compliance, audit, IT, and risk are collaborating. It's the only way to work. It's the efficient way to work. Let's take third-party management, for example. Imagine initially you're doing your initial due diligence to bring in a third party. Included in that initial due diligence, you probably have an information security questionnaire that you want them to complete. That needs IT. When you onboard them, you want to monitor constantly to ensure that they're complying with, for example, your vendor code of conduct. That's compliance. There's most times you would have a right to audit. So who's going to audit? If you decide to take on that right to audit, who's going to audit? Would it be the compliance team? Would it be your audit team? And finally, as with third-party programs, you might have a number of third parties, and you can't apply the same approach to all of them. So you want to prioritize. In order to prioritize, the best way that I know to prioritize is a risk-based approach. Yeah. And so you need risk. So I don't see, and that's just one example, I don't see how in this day and age we can afford to work in silos. We definitely need to collaborate. And that's how the organization that I work for works, and I think that's the direction that lots of people would need to go down. It doesn't make any sense not to collaborate. And then practically, how I do it practically is, so I'm connected with with my counterparts in audit, IT, and risk. I meet up with them regularly. When I'm putting together my compliance program, I'm consulting with them. When I have audit findings, I'm sharing those findings with them, and we're constantly communicating. It's not where it should be, but we know where we're trying to get to.
That's excellent. Yurika, just on this point, we all understand that integration is important. You cannot run a successful organization without having the 3 lines of defense integrated. So how do you see that working in your organization, and do you see any barriers to integration, as in different organizations may have different perceptions, right? So do you see that?
The barriers, I don't see that much anymore. I have to say 3 or 5 years ago I saw that. I think from a risk-based approach, all the control functions are on the same page. They understand that we have to give assurance. All of us are assurance providers. We actually have the same methodology. We have internal control meetings to make sure we're on the same page. We have delegations of authorities to understand what is internal audit's function, what's ours, what is risk. Then we make a combined risk assessment, and then we will follow that through to the organization, which helps quite nicely. So the moment when internal audit goes to do an audit, they know already what the compliance risks are, and that helps us with our assessments and vice versa. So I think that's a very good thing. I think from a second comment that I want to make is that culture again. We have to get it that we are there to help the business. Yeah. We are all there to assist with risk. I mean, that's the most important thing. Again, if I talk 5, 8 years ago, it was purely just have a checklist and tick. There was no value in that, in my view. Yeah. I think the most exciting thing about the new world of compliance and risk and audit, South Africa, we have a 4th control function, which is actuarial. Yeah. So they taught me how to do Control F, just to find on an Excel spreadsheet something. I joke, I'm not that bad at it, but it helps. It helps to have a lot of people to give input into the same situation. So I don't see the barriers anymore in that scenario. I actually see it as a very collaborative and good function.
Anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, actually, I agree with Yurika. I mean, maybe 5 years, 5 to 8 years before, there was a kind of perception that there are some overlap between audit and compliance, and there were sometimes some fights that this is my job, this is your job. I have experienced that. I mean, 8 years ago. For me, it's not there anymore. I see the three functions, the three control functions collaborating, and it is very important for the governance and the compliant culture of an institution where the three of them are working together. For me, compliance and risk are maybe first or second line of defense, where audit is the third line of defense. Audit gives assurance, but it's most of the time it's after the event, after the thing happens. However, compliance and risk, no, they are forward-looking, they are more proactive. They are there to make sure things doesn't happen. Like, for example, if someone asks me, do you do compliance check or compliance test? I say, no, I don't have a regular compliance check or test. I don't have to do this. This is done by audit. However, I do ongoing or daily based compliance check. I make sure things doesn't happen. I don't wait until it happens and then I go and find it and then report it to the board and say my job is done. My job is not to find the mistakes or the violations. My job is to prevent the violations, make sure it doesn't happen, make sure I work very closely with the management and the business team to help them facilitate the business and make sure they are doing the business right, and to protect them and protect the institution and protect myself at the end. So this is I think my view.
Oh, that's excellent. And I think one thing that we are seeing as a trend in the industry is risk and compliance is becoming more and more proactive than a reactive approach, what it used to be 5 years back when all three lines of defense used to fight. So,
Yes.
And I completely agree. Now, you mentioned a very important point. I mean, you provide an assurance function within the organization, and there is no denying that. Now, organizations are growing in terms of product. There is a diversification of product. There is mergers and acquisition, and there is expansion that's happening all the time. How, as a compliance officer, do you make sure that your compliance programs are agile, which enables your organization to grow? Because there is a common perception, or at least there was a common perception, where the compliance function would come in and can act as a showstopper, can actually stop you from progressing. But I think things are changing now. We're seeing more and more compliance organizations being the enabler than someone who's kind of being a roadblock here. So how do you manage these kind of programs in order to make sure that your organization is growing over time? So probably Yurika, will start with you this time.
I was here in June and somebody asked me almost at another conference for something quite similar, and I said typically we were known as the sales prevention officer. I think that is what we were. I don't like to see us like that anymore. I do like us to see actually getting the products and the services to get going. And again, if I would look at a compliance structure or the perfect compliance world, we won't be able to get more resources. The whole economy, the world is struggling. We need to think clever. We need to think with the people that we have. We need to think about systems, how to make things better. And all of this comes down to risk-based. It goes back to your first question. You need to look at your regulatory landscape. If you have the perfect in brackets universe, you'll be able to do it on a risk base. Resources, you need to think strategically. You need to also look and identify in the business who is your champions in there who can actually help you with that. Very important to engage with the first line of defense to actually start helping you with that. Second of all, I speak about the culture. It is extremely important to get the culture from the top right. Because if you have the buy-in from the board and from us as executive manager and from your middle line, then you sort it from a bottom level. That takes, I've been with this company that I'm about 3.5 years. It literally, I have to say, it took me about 3 years to start getting that proper buy-in where they know that you're on their side and that you can actually change the program. And then it's the training. The training element in all of our jobs is extremely important to get the effective compliance program. I do not believe if I get out of here that we're going to get more people, but I know that we can apply those people much better with an organization. And that, I think, is our key function.
Kubra, anything else that you would want to add?
Well, I think I agree with Yurika again. We need to make sure we change the perception of the business people and the management that we are business preventions or we stop business. And we should make them like us at least, because control functions are not liked and they always look at us like we are stopping the business, we are the boss of all bosses. I mean, those kind of things. But I think we're getting there. We're becoming more close to the board and the decision makers. Before I was looking at myself like facilitator. Now, no, I participate in the best decision making. I'm still independent, but I help the management make money because we are there to make money, to do business. We are not there to stop business. So I try to help them how to expand by being involved in committees, being involved in the when there is any new product or new services. I make sure I am involved right from the beginning, and I know all the all what is happening in the institutions right from the beginning. I'm a C-suite level, regardless of what my hierarchy is. But I am a senior management as per the regulation. I'm an approved person. I see myself empowered enough to stop and tell the management this is not the way you should do it. I think compliance officers to help the business grow, you need to be strong enough and flexible enough and independent enough to help the management how to do business.
And on similar lines, I'm curious to know from you, Vona, how hard is it to draw the line between someone who's a facilitator or someone who wants to support the business and at the same time, make sure that things are in order and the controls are put in place? So I'm going to put you in a spot there. So yeah, any thoughts on how you would want to do this or how you're currently doing it now?
It's very difficult, and I smile because I was having a conversation with my team. We've moved one of our processes to India, and we're still responsible for oversight of those processes. So we said to our clients, that process has been moved to India, but we still have oversight over it. They're still within our control environment. So my team's having to go out there to test the process and test the controls, making sure they're applying them as they were applied when they were in the UK. And we've issued our first audit report. We're waiting for management responses from the team. It's taking them probably, and the team is working with the UK team, but the combination of the Indian team and the UK team is probably taking them about 8 weeks to come back with a management response. And I've gone back to my team to say, this is the first time, it's a brand new team, brand new process. It's the first time they've received audit compliance findings. You're going to have to help them write the management response. And it's contrary to the sort of feedback I've given to them when I initially joined, and I saw that the team was helping the business with the management response. And I said, no, that's not you. You're not management. Let business write their own responses, and you can give them feedback on the management response. So I smile because, as of yesterday, I'm giving them a different sort of advice, which is help them because it's new, it's different, and it's difficult. It's difficult. We'd waited 8 weeks. We're still waiting for management responses, and the only way I can see that we can push it forward is to help them write it because they haven't written it before. So it's difficult, but like you said, it's 1.5, right? You're there to help them. Yeah, it's difficult. Is the answer. No, but as long as you're aware, as a professional, that you still need to exercise your independence, your objectivity, your skepticism. You're there to help the business, but you're also there to play a role in your second line of defense. You have to. It's a ball you have to juggle in your head and make sure that it's a balance. It's a fine balance you have to find.
Yeah. No, and I think based on the conversation we had just now, I think it's clear that the compliance officers understand what their role is and where to draw the line, right? But I'm very curious to know, and probably go off script here since we have similar opinions over here. How do you manage the whole compliance culture within the organization, and how, as an organization, you plan to enable your first line? I mean, for some of us here who are in the compliance space, they would be very keen to know how would you manage to do this, because it's not a very easy task, right? In the past, we've had pushbacks coming in from first line. I mean, I know an organization who's trying to implement a solution which is going to help them kind of manage their whole compliance process end to end. But there's a pushback coming in because they see this as a controls function as compared to something which is going to enable them in their day-to-day work, right? So how do you manage that culture and make sure that the first line is in sync with what you guys are doing. But we'll start with you, Yurika. Yeah.
Just to say, it's very much off script, so I don't mind answering that. So do we have second line or first line of defense people here? Can I get a show of hands? Who's first line? Nobody. Okay. Second line, everyone. Third line, right?
Okay.
So again, I go back when we started off, when I started at my company, it was us versus them.
Yeah,
that was the mentality. I never liked coffee that much. I can tell you now I'm a coffee lover. I love it. So I learned to set up coffee sessions. I'm actually just kidding, but you have to create a relationship. That was for me the most important thing with business, and to show them that we have the same goals. Right? That's a very important thing. As I say, 3 years later, if I'm now in a meeting with the business, I can predict that we'll say the same thing because we taught one another. I also had to learn. Compliance also had to learn. We have to learn the business. I remember my first job that I had as compliance officer, my teachings in law school and in compliance was that you are independent, you make findings, you make recommendations, and you follow up. That's how you get taught.
Yeah.
And then you get into business and you see, oh my goodness, but this doesn't work because you're just creating enemies. Never were you taught that you have to go sit around a table and actually learn the business.
Exactly.
So as you grow, and I think that's where the cultures are moving towards, you have to sit with the business, you have to learn it so that you can actually give the proper advice. Again, we were tick box people. I see ourselves now as advisors. I see ourselves as part of the business. If you understand that, you understand the profit of the company, you understand the liabilities. So I think the movement of getting into that first line is the most important thing. It is a challenge. It will constantly be a challenge, but it's an exciting challenge because you can actually starting to see the difference. They used to see compliance as an expense center. We're definitely not a profit center, that I can promise you, but I do believe we're becoming an asset. So typically they would look at us and they see this salary, they say these are just the expenses, we have nothing to see for it. They can start to quantify it now, not in terms of only fines, but actually in seeing you're getting new distribution channels out, you're getting new products, you're getting new services, and that creates embedded value for the company. So I think that's the interesting thing about compliance.
That's great. Vona, anything that you would want?
I've got two examples that I thought about. So first one is in terms of culture. When I first joined, I noticed that all our processes and procedures and policies were called compliance processes. And I just couldn't understand. But I had just joined and I was still observing. But I kept asking, why are they called compliance processes? But that's how the business referred to them. And it probably took about 18 months to educate, and it's about culture, educate that actually, no, they're not compliance processes, they're business processes. Let's look at this business process. It talks you through the steps that you take to carry out a service to your client. It mirrors the property management agreement that you've signed with your clients and the services you're going to deliver to them and how you're going to deliver it. It's your process. And we had to communicate its business processes. It took a long time, but we had to educate people. Another thing that didn't help that I noticed was that those documents were being held on the compliance intranet page. So it didn't help that. So what we did was we set up a process hub, a separate page on the intranet, and we moved all those processes to that hub. So now it's separate. We've got the process hub, which holds all the business processes, and we've got our compliance page. When people need compliance resources, you go separate to the compliance page. So that's helped. And I think little things like that. It was a low-hanging fruit, but it helped in terms of education. The second example that I have is recently my whole team went out to, I think it was Birmingham we went to, and we sent an email out to say the compliance team is here, come and meet your compliance team. Because we find that actually in terms of culture, it's actually different depending on which region it is. So the teams in London are more compliance savvy, I would say, and we found that maybe we were ignoring the region. So we went out to Birmingham, and the sort of questions we were getting were, I can't print from home. Why is that? And it made me realize that when people can't do something, they think it's compliance. So that gave me a different view, and it's a different battle I'm going to have to tackle for next year. But yeah, I thought that was interesting to share.
I think that's what I meant when I said integration with other functions. So compliance can integrate with IT and help them there.
Exactly.
Kubra, anything that you would want to add?
With regard to the compliant culture, we all know, that compliance culture should start from the top. But I don't believe that's really working. Sometimes it really starts from the top, that the board, because we have to tick a box and comply with the regulation and have governance and all those compliance procedures, policies in place, so we're having them in policies. However, the board might be passive, not questioning, not monitoring, not overseeing the management, and the management, they just decide not to implement it. So yes, I have the statement from the top, but I don't have the middle management implementing it. So I think for the culture to be working, it has to also be middle up down and bottom up.
Correct.
With all those young generations, I think things are changing. It's very difficult for, I mean, sorry, but sometimes the culture and governance, it's something coming from within. So you cannot change the culture or make people govern like in one day. It takes them time to adapt, to change, especially the culture. So what we should really focus on the new generation, those new generation, try to teach them. Whenever you go to the board and say, oh, we are giving you a training on governance, they will say, no, what training you want to give me? I don't need training, but you train your staff at least. You make them to push that governance and compliant culture up. Sometimes it works also. So, because if it's top down, I didn't see any change from the top down. So let's try the other way around, bottom up, maybe it works. So that's for the culture. Whether we can really be in synergy and with the business team, I'm sure we will always be disliked, so whatever we do. But at least, I mean, for me, I try to even take a fight with the regulators when I believe sometimes that yes, it is the best for the business to do it this way, and regulation does not allow me to do that. I go and meet the regulator. I try to fight very hard to come up with a way to help the business team achieve what they want to do, or in a different way. Sometimes you take a proactive action to change the regulation based on the market need. So when the management see this behavior, they become like, you know, they trust you. Trust is important. They know that you are not stopping the business. Some compliance officers, they just it's black or white. They say the rules doesn't allow it. They don't think out the box how I make it possible, or how can I go and talk to the regulator, or try to find a way, sit with the legal department, see how I can make it possible. So this is, I think it's important for compliance officers to do also.
That's great, and I think we all agree that the culture is changing.
Yeah.
No matter how much the compliance team is being considered as a pseudo ID team, or probably someone who's not liked within the organization, the compliance organization is working towards to make sure that they are being seen as someone who's there to help the business and make sure that the business is coming in and the business is here to grow. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I do have about 5 minutes to take a few more questions. So any questions from the audience? Yes, Faisal, go ahead.
In your respective organizations.
Sorry, Faisal, do you mind using the mic?
So in your respective organizations, have you thought about monetizing compliance and its adherence linked to financial rewards? Because most of us in this room are from compliance or risk, or one way or the other from the control functions, but we all, at the end of the day, work for financial rewards. Yeah. So in your organizations, how have you thought about monetizing compliance and risk? And so it really comes down to top to bottom. I've worked for a company before, one of my clients, and the CEO in his company charter put operational risk in the second bullet point. And it really came down to, it really got translated into the financial rewards. It got linked to the financial rewards. If you don't comply with operational risk, if you don't look after your controls, if you don't test the adequacy and design and the adequateness and design effectiveness of the controls, your bonus is going to get impacted. So have you, in your organization or in the wider landscape of the organizations you have worked as chief compliance officers, have you thought about monetizing compliance and how widely accepted it is?
Yeah,
So
go
I
ahead,
can
Kubra.
go. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you please.
So what we did, we have a RISE award. RISE stands for Risk Improvement and Compliance Excellence Awards. And so if we notice that someone has, because they've complied, so for example, supplier fraud is rampant, but we have key controls like, what's it called? Independently verifying bank details before you change them. And so there was an instance where there was an attempted fraud and someone picked it up and they followed process, and because of that we saved £80,000. And so that was when we started the awards, and we awarded him, sent an email around, and it was just vouchers, but at least people see that it pays to be compliant, and they could also see how much we had saved the firm. I put my hand up and say we haven't been as proactive at what's it called, and making sure more people have been awarded the rights rewards, but that's something we started. From a monetizing perspective, we also sell compliance, especially my team, as a unique selling point. So not many of our competitors have a separate compliance team for the business line that I work with. And so to our clients, we provide them with third-party assurance reports every year. And so instead of monetizing it, they see most of our clients are financial services organizations. I work in the real estate industry, which is not as regulated. But we say to them, because we understand that you're well regulated and risk is important to you, we will give you this third-party assurance report every time, and I go and meet them. So that's a different element, that's a different side to it.
Anything you regard that you may want to add?
I think your question is I think it's a very good response. I think it's a broader question. I think there are different levels. So what you're explaining is that on an operational level it's been implemented. I think you're probably asking on a senior level, on a senior manager's level. I think there's still a way to go. So typically businesses are looking at, in the insurance, they look at embedded value, they look at value of new business, in effect profit. After profit you get your portion of that. That's typically how people are aligned. All new regulations are saying you need to be remunerated for the function that you do correctly, and that needs to look at risk as well. I do think from a bottom perspective that's been implemented. People are measured on quality, they are measured on compliance. I do think on the executive or your senior managers level, there is room for improvement.
Of course.
Because, and I think that is going to be the challenge for the next, I would say the next 5 years, is to align that. But I think it's a very good question.
Brilliant, thank you. One last question before we wrap up? Yes, please.
How is cybersecurity impacting each of you?
Sure.
Brilliant. Can we go first?
Okay, I'm from South Africa, so everybody would probably think everything happens there. Cybersecurity is not only the international biggest risk, by far everybody's looking for cybercrime insurance, that's the first thing. Second of all, it's a risk that we cannot quantify at this stage. We had a big insurance company during April in South Africa that had cybercrime. It was one of the leading insurance company. The effect that it had on reputational risk was phenomenal. In terms of not only a fine with us, the Data Privacy Act or Protection of Personal Information Act is not effective yet, but in terms of the reputational risk to the clients and the information that was leaked, I can tell you it was millions of policyholders that was lost during that process. Cybercrime, I do not think we're ever going to know how to quantify it. I can tell you we have a response plan for it. We have BCPs and plans. We make sure that we have all the necessary insurance in place. I think that is, for me, the new compliance world is cybercrime. It is something that's on all our agendas, whether it's audit, whether it's risk, whether it's board committees. If I can sit here today and say to you, I have a perfect response, I don't. I heard the other day there was a 4-year child that actually hacked a very big insurance company at McDonald's. They were sitting at McDonald's, a child of 4 years. He hacked the system in 3 minutes. So for a 4-year child, who literally, in my mind, shouldn't actually be able to use an iPad, he hacked the system. So what we all do, I don't know if you guys do it, but we get professional, legitimate hackers to go into our system to see how strong is the systems. And every time they will get through it. So cybercrime for us is a huge risk. I had an opportunity the other day to speak to somebody from Lloyd's of London. They said that's their priority for this year, is to make sure that they can have a proper response plan. Quantification, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I mean, the cybersecurity is very important for the financial sector, of course, and it's very critical because it affects the customers' data and confidentiality. But of course, I mean, with the transformation and IT disruption and transformation and compliance also, and in fintech, it will become more. So for investment banking, it's not really affecting us, but for retail banks, yes, definitely, it's a huge headache, and they have to address it really carefully.
I was in Mexico last week with the Mexican Banking Association. Quantification of insider threat in this area, anything from 60 to 90%. So to say it doesn't affect investment banking is probably not the case. It's just, do you know about it?
Yeah.
No, but I mean, because we are not having online electronic banking, we are not into digital banking and electronic or online banking. While for retail banks, they are providing online services and electronic and digital services. For us, we don't do so. Once you are into, I mean, yes, we have cybersecurity risk for our softwares, for our internal software. But for retail banks, it's more of a risk than for investment banks. So, I mean, we haven't even the regulators, they are having more strict regulation for retail banks than for investment banks.
Got it.
I mean, I was curious about how internally you're being given educational advice on what to do, say, how to audit, that kind of, how to augment your traditional process with what you're now expected, which is not traditionally something that you'd be knowledgeable in, because it's traditionally been a very specialist area. So how's that actually transferring to your roles?
Yeah, you want to take that? Yeah, go ahead.
Mine's really quick. I've started with education. Cybersecurity, a lot of people focus on technology, but it's also a lot about awareness and educating people that we're only as strong as the weakest link.
Yeah.
We do random tests to see if people would send out emails and see how many people click. The number of people that still click on those links, I cannot understand. Like, I had someone who was supposed to be an associate director trying to click on the link because he had been promised that he had won the lottery. I don't get it. But for me, I think awareness. So what I've started with is awareness and training, because the human firewall is equally as important as any security or technology firewall.
Yeah.
We also have once a year Harry the Hacker show. So basically exactly the same. We do testing. We send randomly out to people, please open this link after they've been trained to explain that you're not allowed to do it. And we do it even at an exco level. We are about 21 executives in our company, and about 11 of them clicked on it. So just to give you an idea, from a top, bottom, top, education is extremely important from an internal audit, and that's the collaboration for me of all the assurance functions. We see a lot of expertise in internal audit, where people have a lot of IT experience that they can start help auditing. Again, to do proactive plans. And I think it's a very a prominent question that you're asking at this stage. Because cybercrime, from my perspective, from insurance perspective, it's the string is it's endless. We don't know where it's going to be. If I look at what we looked at, technology will be 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I remember I was maybe one of the first people in South Africa who had an iPad. Everyone has an iPad these days, so things are moving too fast. Your response plans, what you have in place now, in all likelihood in 4 months will not be the same. It is something that needs to be on the agenda of any risk and audit and board committee. That I can tell you. The answer from an audit point of view, I don't think we are equipped enough yet. So I do think we also need a bit of more training from a compliance point of view to start assessing those risks.
Good.
Brilliant. So we have run out of time, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for your time, and I hope the session was productive. It's very rare to see 3 compliance officers sitting here and smiling and having a good time, but we are glad we were able to make that happen. So thank you very much. In case you have any questions, all 3 of them are going to be here at the summit, so you can just take your questions offline. Thank you very much, Kubra, Vona, and Yurika, for your time. Thank you again, and have a lovely day. Cheers.